Hello again, I'm Wendy J. Haney, and today I'm going to show you how to make this adorable heart block. Isn't that cute? Yep, my friend Alicia reached out to me and said, hey, I see this pattern, this quilt for heart blocks that somebody's made, and how did they do that? I love questions like that. So, I'm going to show you how to do this. What I did was I took the image she sent me and I printed it out. I cropped it so I could get just the kind of the one quilt block that it looked like it was, and I printed it out. And then I looked at it and went, okay, let's see. I think we can draw a line down the middle. Yep. And I'm pretty sure that's one block there based on the angles. So we're going to draw a line there. And then there's the top of that block. Okay. That's the edge of the block. So basically I'm showing you this. So if you're ever in this situation, you could dissect a block and kind of figure out how did they do that. Okay, so we've got that. And then, okay, that's a corner there. So that's logical. And this doesn't need to be exact, but I've got a corner up here. That's a corner there. So it's logical to connect my lines there. We've got the same thing over there. We've got a connection point there, which is generally the corner of a block, and another one here. We're just, hopefully you can see, yeah, you can kind of see my lines. Okay, so we've got that. Let me switch to a marker. And then, okay, well, this is obviously the top of the block there on our border. And there's a bottom there because of this point. And it would be logical based on that being a point and these intersecting here that we've got a corner there. You know what? I'm going to make this one darker for you. And that one. Okay. So in looking at this, I'm going to hold this up and hopefully, as you can see, I drew lines on it. I basically divided it up based on looking where the points were, connecting the dots, and essentially I went, oh, well, this is pretty easy. You've got your white background fabric. I need 2 squares. So basically, let me back up. This is a 4x4 block. So if you did 2-inch finished blocks, you'd end up with an 8x8 block. I'm going a little bigger, and I went with 3-inch finished blocks, and so we're getting a 12-inch finished larger block. So let's see. Half square triangle, half square triangle, half square, 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 square. Okay, we're dealing with a lot of half square triangles and regular squares. That's easy. But then these two in the middle, we're going, okay, what are they doing there? My first thought was, oh, we need a flying geese in there and then like a rectangle. No, after I was walking this through with my neighbor, all of a sudden, conk on the head. No, this is just a square, and we're going to put little squares in the corner and then flip them up, and we've got those 2 blocks. So that is how I dissected this to figure out how to make this beautiful heart block. I pulled the fabrics out of my stash so I could see what we were going to do, and now I'm going to show you how to do this too. This would make really cute baby quilt, table runner, lots of things you could do with it. So let's do this. Here's what you're going to need. You're going to need 3 different colors of fabric. Your background fabric, which I've got a kind of an off-white tone on tone. Your heart, which I've gone with red. And your middle. And in this case, I went with blue. purely because this is what I pulled from my stash last weekend when I was playing with this. But I thought it turned out kind of cute. Okay, so from your background fabric, I decided I'm going to make a 12-inch finished block. So each of these block components are 3.5-inch unfinished. So we need two 3.5-inch squares for our corner. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have 8 half square triangles that are the red and white combination. Well, I've got a method where we can get 2 half square triangles from a 4-inch square of fabric. So since I have 8 half square triangles of white and red, that means we need 4 white squares, and we're going to go with 4-inch. We need a 4-inch white square in order to get 2 3.5-inch half square triangles. And that means then, so that's all we need for the white. Then for the red, I need, for these white and red combinations, I need 4 half square triangles. But you'll also notice I have half square triangles that are a red and blue combination. Nicely enough, I only need 2, which means I need a 4-inch block of my red. So this means I now need 5 4-inch blocks of red, 4-inch squares of red, and then we have these 2 3.5-inch squares of red. And I'm going to get back to these little doohickey things here in a minute. From our blue, we need 1 4-inch square in order to make our 2 half square triangles. And then for these, we're going to start with a blue 3.5-inch square. Now, in order to make these little, let's just call them little house blocks. Basically, they're a square, and then you're tacking on squares in the corner and sewing an angle on them. So to figure out what size squares you need to throw in the corner, you're going to take the finished block size. So in this case, finished block size is 3. You're going to divide it by 2 because we want a square in each corner. 3 divided by 2 is 1.5 inches. Then you have to add your seam allowances. So we have a 1/4 inch on this side and a 1/4 inch on that side of this square. So we add a 1/2 inch. So that means if I'm working with a 3-inch finished block, I need a 2-inch squares in my corners. If you decided you wanted to do this smaller and be working with 2-inch squares, then these little squares there are going to be 2 divided by 2 is 1. Add your 1/2 inch, so they're going to be 1.5 inch squares. Okay, so let's get going with it. That's what we're going to need, and I'll make sure I post that in the description as well, and I'm sure Kevin will add some text up as I talk to you through that. So here's the deal. If you're making one block, you don't need a lot of fabric. So if the background fabric, basically you need a 4-inch strip straightened, so you're probably going to want to start with a little wider than 4-inch, a 4-inch straightened piece of fabric, which is about 1/8 of a yard, and 23 inches of it. So a little more than a width of the fabric of your 4-inch strip. For the red, you're going to need 31 inches of that 4-inch cut. So once again, 1/8 of a yard. For your middle, you really only need 11 inches of a 4-inch wide strip. So, basically, if you're buying yardage, you're going to need 1/8 of a yard. And that is just for one block. It's going to give you a little extra of more than you need. So with that said, basically, you'll need to start doing the math if you're going to make more of these. So if you're making a full quilt and it's all the same 3 colors, just remember for every block, you need 23 inches of white, 31 inches of red, and 11 inches of your blue. So you're outside your heart and your middle. Hopefully that will help you do the math if you're trying to do something bigger. Now, if you got 1/8 of a yard of fabric, that's a little over 4 inches wide. And more than likely, you're going to need to trim it up to get it straight. So let's just assume I've got a bigger piece of yardage here, but as you can see, my edges aren't exactly straight on that side. So when I gave you the yardages, I was basically saying cut a 4-inch strip. But if you're working with a lot more yardage and you're going to make a lot of these blocks, then I would highly recommend you cut some 3.5-inch strips to get your 3.5-inch blocks and some 4-inch strips to get your 4-inch blocks. Therefore, you're not wasting by cutting a 4-inch strip and then trimming a whole bunch of the blocks down to 3.5. It all depends on kind of how you're buying your fabric and what you have. Or this could actually be a completely adorable quilt if you went totally scrappy, where you had a wide variety of different fabrics for all your different hearts. So I'm going to show you how to square up your fabric and cut a 4-inch strip, and then we'll trim it down to get some of our 3.5-inch blocks from it. Okay, so first thing we need to do is we need to get a straight edge here. So what I do is I put just a short, smaller ruler over here and get it straight on the fold line down here. Then I take my long ruler that is long enough to be the full width of the fabric. And here, yeah, I've got just a little bit of my fabric up there, and I've got a lot more fabric, at least almost a 1/2 inch down here I'm going to trim. But you know what? That's just, whoopsie, the way things are. So I'm going to get this straight, put that there, put this on top of it, making sure I'm keeping, and you know what? I'm cutting off a little more, so I'm going to hedge this over here to my left so I don't waste too much fabric at the top. There. That looks good. So I'm going to move that aside. I'm going to hold down this edge, and I'm going to square up, get a nice straight edge on this side of my fabric. Now, in this case, we're going to just cut a 4-inch strip. And we're going to get my 4-inch there, nice angle there that matches my fold line. Okay, so there I have my 4-inch strip of fabric. So this is how you square up your fabric, and you're going to do the same thing with your white and your blue, depending on how you bought your fabric. So now we have a 4-inch strip. And so of the red, I'm going to use almost all of it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to trim off the selvage. I'm going to just use my ruler here. Trim off my selvage. Okay, I need 5 4-inch squares that we're going to use for our half square triangles. You know what? I'm going to get rid of that big ruler, work with this. I've got a OmniGrid 6-inch by 12-inch ruler that comes in really handy. So there's my 4, 2, 3. Okay, so I'm going to just cut 1, 2, 3. And I usually like to stay out of the middle. I have a little more room before I get to the middle. 3, 4, and I can get that 5th one before I even get to my middle seam that I haven't pressed out over here. Okay, so there's my 5. 1, 2, 3. There's my 5 4-inch squares that I need for the red. And I'm going to trim this other end, get rid of the selvage. Now we're going to need 3.5 inch. I only need 2 3.5 inch. So we're going to just cut the 4-inch strip to be 3.5 inches wide. We're going to cut 2 of those. There we go. And then all these sides are currently square. So I'm going to just flip it and trim it up to be a 3.5 by 3.5 inch square. So I need to do that. So in that regards, I'm dropping off. I'm losing a 1/2 inch of fabric there. And I'm going to do the same thing with the other piece. So essentially, I'm going to lose waste because 1/2 inch, you aren't going to do nothing with that. So that 1/2 inch fabric is truly waste. And that's why I say, if you're going to make more than one block, cut 3.5 inch strips and cut your 3.5 inch blocks and cut 4 inch strips and cut your 4 inch blocks. So you're not wasting and doing that extra cut. Now, with the heart, I need 4 2-inch squares for my little corners, and I always lose. So I need my itty bitty squares in the corners here. Well, guess what? This is really easy. We've got a 4-inch strip and we're gonna cut a 4-inch square. And then what we do is we turn it and you cut it in half that way. Now you have 2-inch strips, and if you're really careful and don't move anything, you can just flip your ruler and bingo, you now have your 4 2-inch squares that you need. Okay, I am not going to walk you through cutting all the rest of your fabric, but go ahead now and you're going to need 2 3.5 inch squares of your white and 4 4-inch squares of your white. Of your blue, your middle fabric, you're going to need 2 3.5 inch squares and 1 4-inch square. And then we're going to go ahead and get these half square triangles made. I now have everything cut out that I need. And as you can see, I have a little bit of a sticky note thing. A 3.5 inch square and a 4-inch square is very close together. And the last thing you want to do is grab the wrong size. And the other thing is, your 3.5 inch squares, do not make half square triangles out of them. I was on a roll when I made the first block and I grabbed all my squares and I turned them all into half square triangles, and then I'm like, those 3.5 inch squares were supposed to be just 3.5 inch squares. Oops. So, said from experience. Okay, so we have those. I've labeled them. The other thing, when you're working with tone-on-tone fabric, make sure you put them in a pile, validate that everything is right side up, because tone-on-tone, it's always a bugger when you grab it and you sew it together and go, that was the right side to a wrong side, and that's not cool either. Okay, so we're gonna set these aside, and we're gonna grab our 3.5 inch squares of blue and our 2-inch squares of red. Because if you remember, in our little block here, our heart, we have 2 of these blocks, these little house blocks that are making the tip of our heart. So we need to get that. So we take the 2 3.5 inch squares of our middle fabric, for me it's blue, and then you're going to take your 2-inch squares, and I'm going to get a, where do I have a darker marker? Oh, well, this should work. Each of your 2-inch squares, you're going to draw an angle corner to corner. And whether you've got this, or oftentimes you'll see me using a square, but the edge of your square should be on an angle if you happen to have a ruler that has an angle, and then you're doing corner to corner, and you need a line drawn on there. Yep, that's dark enough, though I might switch to my pencil. You're gonna do this on all 4 of these little squares, okay? I'm on a roll. We're gonna just do this. There, and 1 more. Just make sure this is your sew line. This is the line you're gonna sew on. Okay, Then you're going to take one of your blocks and you're going to put a square. Just one, not both. Because if you try to do both, you're going to realize, they overlap. That's not going to work. So for each of your blocks, put your little square in the corner. Your angle that you just drew on your 2-inch block is from here to here. It is not towards the middle of your block. And then make sure that's nice and square with the edge of your block, and you're going to pin it. And with these, I like to flip around because we're going to go to the sewing machine and stitch exactly on that line that you drew corner to corner on your 2-inch blocks. And I should have had one block already done, but that's all right. Okay, I'm going to take those to the sewing machine and we're going to get those sewn. And then you'll see what we do next. I've taken each of these blocks and I sewed on the line. Now remember, your thread has a weight, your line has a weight. So I have a tendency when I'm sewing directly on a line to hedge, and I'm talking just a tiny bit. I generally don't stitch right on the line, or if I do, I'm very careful to be right on the line. But I'm generally hedging where I'm a little bit towards the outside of the block, okay? Just a tad. Because then what we do is you take it to the ironing board. What I do is always finger press it first, and then I take it to the iron like I did with this one. And then we're going to, you can do it with a plain scissors. You don't need to get out your ruler, but sometimes I do. You're going to cut a 1/4 inch from your stitch line. So basically you're cutting off the extra corner that you don't need. You don't need that bulk. Okay, and we're going to do after I press this one, I'm going to do the same thing. Then you're going to come and you're going to put that second set of squares and actually, put the second set of squares matching up. In this case, because I hedged towards the outside, my red is just a little bit wider, but you want to line it up with your blue block. We'll square up that block after the fact, okay? So then you're going to do this on both of your blocks and do the exact same thing. Stitch on your diagonal, which is from here to here. Stitch on that, then we're going to do the same things, and you have 2 little houses. Okay, now we have our 2 little houses. So this one, I already went and pressed, and I cut off the corner, just like I did on the other side. So on the back, this is what it's going to look like. You're going to be able to see those red squares. So this one, I already pressed. I'm going to come back here and cut a 1/4 inch from the seam. Okay, now, as I said, when you kind of hedge these sometimes, the top isn't quite your 3.5 inch. So what I do is I take a square ruler and I go in and kind of square things up. Yep, that one's a little kitty wampus over the edge. I just square it up on the edge to make sure I have a truly 3.5 inch square still. The key thing is you want to make sure that you're getting this point there, that it is down a 1/4 inch from the top. So that's something to pay attention to. And mine is good. I've just got a little extra hanging off the top there that I'm going to trim. Let's see how we did with this one. 3.5. Yep. I got a little extra on the side from my seam and the top. Okay, there we go. Oh, that didn't. Did that? Yeah, that trimmed. Okay, now we have our two little houses. Now we're ready to work with our half square triangles, and you're going to have a lot of them. Okay, so what I would suggest you do, and I'm not going to show you how to do every single one because they are identical. Key thing is paying attention of what goes with what. So you need a pair of 4-inch squares. So a red one and a white one. Hang on here. My reach wasn't as long as I thought it was. A 4-inch square of red and a 4-inch square of my white, my background, is going to make these two half square triangles. Okay? So basically you're going to, if you're working with your heart color and your background, you need 1, 2, 3, 4. Whoops. There's 1 pair, 2, 3, 4 pairs. 4 squares of red, 4 squares of white will get you those. Then you're going to go back after those are done. All you have left is your half square triangles of your red and your blue. So in that case you need, that's like I said, 4-inch and 3.5-inch can be very close if they're not sitting next to each other. So in that case, you've got your 4-inch of your blue, and you're going to grab a 4-inch of your red. Okay? So let's do the red and the blue since we only need one of those, but it's going to be exactly the same you're going to do to get all of the ones for your background and your heart fabric, your red and white. Take one of your fabrics. It does not matter which one. I am going to take my blue because it's the lightest fabric. You're going to take your ruler. In this case, I grabbed my Omni Grid 6.5-inch square. It has the nice angle here, my 45-degree angle that I can put on the edge of the square. And then make sure I get one corner there. If you do that and you match a corner up here with the corner of your ruler, the other corner should be right there, exactly where you need it to be. And you're going to draw a diagonal, just like we did with those 2-inch squares. So now I have a diagonal on my blue square. We're going to put the two 4-inch squares together, right sides together. Yep, right sides together, and we're going to pin them. Now, here's what is different than what we did with the little 2-inch squares. Do not sew on the line. You're going to instead sew a 1/4 inch on either side of the line. I happen to have a sewing machine foot that has a 1/4 inch guide on it. So I'm going to put the guide on my line, and I'm going to get a 1/4 inch away from it for my seam. I'm going to flip it and put the guide here, and I'm going to have a 1/4 inch on that side. Now, if you are much more comfortable stitching on a line versus tracking against a middle one, then by all means, once you have your diagonal in the middle drawn, get your ruler and this will be a better, make sure I can put a 1/4 inch mark. I put the marking on my line, and a 1/4 inch away from it, I'm going to draw another line. We flip it around, do the same thing. So basically, you now have your center line, which essentially is going to be a cut line, and you've drawn a 1/4 inch on either side of it. So now you have your stitching lines also. And I would hedge, in this case, back to your thread having weight, when you fold a seam over, it has weight, and your marking pen has a weight. I would suggest you hedge a tad towards the inside of this. So if you hedge towards the center on both sides, then you'll be good. Either way, this is a large enough block that we're going to end up trimming down our finished half square triangles to be the 3.5 inch we need. So either way, this does not, it's not an end all be all. You'll be just fine and have some wiggle room to trim up the blocks. Okay, so now that we've marked that, I'm going to go ahead and pin them again. I'm gonna actually go mark a whole bunch of mine and then sew all of them at the same time at the sewing machine. So we should be having a set of these and 4 of the red and white ones. And I think, yep, 4 of the red and white. Yep, that's what we need. So 1 of this and 4 of the red and white combinations. Go make your half square triangles, mark them, and then do your sew line, and then I'll come back, sew on either side of the center, your 1/4 of an inch, and then I'll come back and show you what we're going to do with the rest of them to get them all nice and perfect and turned into 3.5 inch half square triangles. Now that you have your half square triangles all sewn, what you're gonna do is you've got your center line that you drew and then you stitched a 1/4 inch on either side. You can either use a scissors and cut or come back to your cutting mat and use the rotary cutter and cut on the center diagonal. Okay, and then bingo! You have 2 half square triangles, which I am going to press, just finger press right now. Okay, here's the deal. Well, actually, before I get into that, let's do this. I have a red and white half square triangle nope. I'm going to go back to my original thought here. Okay, go ahead and finger press these. What we're going to do is we're going to eventually press them with the iron, and then we're going to trim them. But here's the thing I learned from the first time I did the block, is that in the block, we have so many seams that are interconnecting. And it would be really nice if your seams were pressed such that they tied together nicely. Normally, I would say, oh, press to the dark. Well, then you start putting the blocks together and your seams are both folded the same way. So what I did was, I took my block and, okay, so luckily I have 1 block done, but I started with my little picture as the starting point. So I had my printout of my block. And actually, I'm gonna set that right in front of me, okay? So I know I'm gonna have a red and white triangle. Then we're gonna have that one. Actually, we're gonna have that one. And then we're gonna have another white flip that way and a white flip that way. And down here a few rows, we're gonna have, okay, so we're gonna have our blue and our red together. So this is a perfect example in this case. We've got our blue and our red together. Well, if I pressed both of the seams, let's just assume I pressed them both to the blue side, okay? That means when we fold them over to sew them together, the seams are all going the same direction, which is never a good thing. So in this case, we want one pressing to the red and the other pressing to the blue, okay? So I would finger press those. Make sure you got those so that you take those to the ironing board. Oh, yeah, so let's leave those in place for those, because then we've got our red here. Okay, that's really not going to matter here. And then we've got a red and a red here. So these two matter. So one of these we want to press to the red and the other one to the white. So go ahead and do that with each of your pairs. And actually here you're going to kind of want to pay attention to all 4 of them. So get your center to right to start with. So you're going to press one to the red and one to the white. That way they'll nest very nicely. So then you go, okay, that one's to my white. That means this one has to press to the red. This is to the red side, so this one has to press to the white. And I think that, yeah, that should be the gist of it. So if you look at it and lay it out from a pressing perspective, then you'll end up with nicer seams when you press things all together. Okay, so this, go set those aside. This one I've already pressed to the red side, and I've actually pressed it with the iron, so it is actually ready to be trimmed. So once you've figured out which side to press each of your half square triangles, get them pressed and nice and pretty. Then you're going to come with a ruler that has an angle in it, because what we want to do is we're going to trim these up to be 3.5 inches. They are just slightly more than 3.5 inches, giving you that little wiggle room to trim them up, like maybe 1/8 of an inch. So put your center, your diagonal of your ruler on the diagonal of your half square triangle, making sure down here at the bottom you've got wiggle room to trim past a 3.5 inch mark, and you do on the edges up here, making sure your corners match. So here I've got a little to trim here, little to trim there, and once we flip it, there's still to trim on all 4 sides. That's ultimately the goal, is positioning your ruler in a fashion. So basically what I did was I cut it and then I flipped it. So now we still have our nice angle, but in this time, your 3.5 is going to match exactly on your edges. So now you're matching 3.5 inches on the edge of your square, your half square triangle. You're going to make sure your center line is still there. Everything's perfect. And you're going to trim the edges. And bingo, you have a perfect 3.5 inch half square triangle. So there you go. That's what you're going to do. You're going to figure out which direction to press your seams on your half square triangles, press them, then come back and trim them all up to be 3.5 inch squares. Because I wanted to make sure I was keeping my blocks straight as far as which seams were going either direction, I basically worked in pairs. I would get them figured out in pairs, take them to the ironing board, and then came back and trimmed them and left them where they needed to be. Okay, so however you did it, you have a handful of half square triangles on our 2 little houses. So the easiest thing is to start in the middle. We want our little houses with the points of our hearts at the top. What I did here is I took one of the little houses and I flipped the seam down. So I have this, I pressed down, and this block is pressed up. So that way, when we sew these 2 together, they'll be nested nicely. Okay, so basically what you're gonna wanna do is lay out your heart. So we got our little houses there with their little roof lines. Then we're gonna throw in our center, our blue and red. Now we've got our heart center. Now we're gonna put our outsides. So we've got the peaks of our hearts on the outside. And then here's where we start throwing in those squares. We had 2 red 3.5 inch squares that go right here. Then we get our angles again. And you're gonna know, if you get something flipped around, you're gonna look at it and go, huh, something doesn't look right. So just making sure, use something as a reference point. I will create a template for this that you can download that has it kind of laid out so you can see. That way you have that as kind of a printout. And I will work on a pattern for this. I am hoping to have it ready by the time this video is released on Friday. Please, I will work my best to get that done for you. If not, it will be coming. The joys of doing YouTube and a full-time job still. But I'm loving this. So now we have our last 2 half square triangles at the bottom for our point, and finally our 2 3.5 inch squares of our white. So here, your squares for your background are here, your squares for your heart is there. We have our little houses. Everything else is your half square triangles. Now that you have it all laid out, now is when we put it together. You can do it one of two ways. You can either do your rows or your columns. Either way works. I have a tendency to go flip, 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 and do my rows. So what I'll do is I flip these over and I will take each of these and I'm going to pin these. Okay, so you're going to do this with each of them, making sure that as you take these, simplest thing is keeping them same order, top to bottom, though it's easy enough after the fact to come back and rearrange them if necessary. Biggest thing is pinning the side you're going to stitch on. Believe me, I've taken enough things to the sewing machine and either didn't pin them or pinned them, I don't know, weirdly, and sewed them on the wrong side. Not fun. And then I just stack them. So essentially, when I get done here, I'm going to put this here. When I get done, the top of my block is going to be my top square. And here's where, this is where you're going to match, you're going to kind of match that center seam there. And because of how we pressed things, you should be able to nest. See, I pinned that one kind of weird. So make sure, I'm gonna pin it differently so I sew the right side. Okay, so there we go. There's my first set of rows. Then I do exactly the same thing with this row, making sure when you do it this way, because I'm a righty, I need to kind of twist it a little and pin it on the right side. Okay, so I'm not going to walk you through that, but basically you're going to do the same thing. You're going to take each of these, put them together, nest your seams. You don't nest it there. Here's the first one you nest. You're going to nest your angle of the seams so it's nice and square, and your angle on your half square triangle matches, and that you're pinning on the correct side of the block. So then you're going to have all of these stacked nice and neatly, and then you can take them to the sewing machine and you're going to sew a 1/4 inch. You're going to take both piles to the sewing machine, sew a 1/4 inch. I guess it'd be this way, sorry. Nope, that way. Blah, blah, all messed up there. 1/4 inch in from this edge, a 1/4 inch in from this edge, and you're now going to have 2 rows. And then we're going to come back and we're going to put essentially the 2 sides of your heart together in the middle, and then you're going to have a heart. Well, we're not quite ready to sew everything together. What we have is a lot of 2-set blocks. So what I did is, as I said, I sewed them all together in my rows, and then I came back to the cutting mat and laid them all out and made sure I had them exactly the way they needed to be. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take our pairs of blocks and do exactly what we did to create our others. Basically, I threw them together and we're creating 4 rows of blocks. So we're going to do this, and here we've got our triangles, our angles down here at the bottom. So if you pressed right, they should nest nicely. The same with that one. This one, because I flipped one of my seams, those should nest nicely as well. And this one. So this is really the row that when you do all of these, you've got a lot of nesting of your angles and making sure they're nice and nested. So you're going to make sure that everything's nice and nested and straight. And then get this one, and then you're going to pin them. Then we are going to have our 4 rows of blocks. At that point in time, then we figure out the direction to press each row, and then we start sewing our rows together. Once again, after I get my rows all sewed together, I bring it back to the cutting mat, laying all my rows out to make sure they're in the right order. Okay, now what we want to do, this is the point we want to press things. And usually I look at it and go, generally I do one side or the other. So in this case, it's probably logical to have, well, I kind of figure out the best way to press based on the seams. And it appears to be a half a dozen of one, 6 of the other. So what I would suggest you do to keep things really simple is press this row to the right, press this row to the left, this row to the right, this row to the left. Basically, you're alternating which direction you're pressing everything. So I would take 2 rows to your ironing board and press them and making sure you've got them right. Then while you're at the ironing board, put the 2 rows together and pin them. And with the seams in the opposite direction, they should nest nicely. And then you're going to pin them. So then this row will be all ready to sew. Then you're going to take this set of blocks to the ironing board, and remembering that you did to the right, to the left, this one's to the right. Sometimes what I do is, let me unpin this. Sometimes what I'll do in making sure that I get these right, I will put a pin. I'm pressing this row to that direction. I'm pinning this row to that direction. This row's going that way, and this row's going this way. Key thing is to make sure you're pressing them in the right direction, then you're folding them together there, then here you're going to fold those, and you're going to have two sets of rows sewn together. Once again, we're back at the cutting mat. We have our 2 rows sewed together, paying attention, kind of taking a look at them and going, okay, how are my points? I might want to go back and tweak this seam a tad. I seem to have cut off a little bit of my point there. Other than that, my angles look good. Yep, I think I'm gonna go back and rip this one out and reposition it a little. I must have gotten a little high there. So I have a nice point on that. Double check everything and make sure it looks good at this point in time. Then the final seam. This is all before you start pressing. So we're gonna take this one over top of this. You're going to match your seams, and in this case, your seams should still be perfectly ready to nest, whereas one in this on the top, the seams are going this way. On the bottom, the seams are going the other way. So it's very easy to get this all nested in. Pin it and then sew it, and then you're gonna have your 12-inch block. And I will show you how to do some pressing to optimize and make sure some of those seams, because we've got a lot of spots where, oh, it could get a little bulky. And so I'll show you some thoughts on how you can press that to eliminate some of that. Okay, we have our block. Yep, it's not very pretty and not very pressed, but I'm pretty happy with my seams everywhere, my 1/4 inches on the sides. Now, on the back, at some points, okay, this one here, we've got quite a bit of a bulk if we try and press it one way or the other. You could, in this case, press this one down, and this row's not too bad, but there's a little trick you can use that I call pinwheeling, that you can, let's do this one here in the middle. Basically, you just take it and you twist your seam, and one goes one way and the other goes the other way, therefore giving you a much flatter seam to press. The tricky thing with doing that is, great, we got that one done. But then if we do this other one, it wants to twist the opposite way. So that doesn't always work. This one, I'm actually not worried about that seam too much. This one, though, is a little bulkier. So maybe I'll pinwheel this one, let that go up, and what's the chance? Nope, that one's gonna be a bugger. So you can see which ones you can pinwheel and which ones you can't, and you're just gonna have to go with it. It's just kind of one of those things with seams, and then go through and get your seams pressed nice and neat, and you're going to have your block. Now, I'll probably try and get a few more done and do a follow-up little video at the end here, but these blocks can just be put next to each other like this, which isn't too, that looks kind of nice that way, but then when you're doing hearts this way, well, they're right next to each other. So you might decide, let's do sashing. So have a slim piece of fabric. You know, looking at this right now, a piece of, 1 inch blue sashing in between my blocks could be very, very pretty. Or you make them in rows, so they're like this, without any sashing, but your second row, you offset. Therefore, maybe you do that, where you offset them. You can play with these things once you get a few more of your blocks done to decide whether you want to do sashing, what you might want to do. I was thinking of doing one more. This actually isn't, this would be, if I didn't put sashing, this would be, they're 12-inch blocks finished, so it'd be a 24-inch block, which if I put a border on it, that's a pretty decent table runner. Or I could put a little sashing and do 4 of them and have a nice square table topper. Lots of things that you could do with this block, but it really is cute. I think it would make an adorable baby quilt. You could go with pinks or blues, pastels, or go with the greens and the yellows and the different colors that could be completely gender neutral. Because I know what it's like to be making baby quilts and not knowing what it's going to be ahead of time. So those are always fun to do. So with that said, I'll put some links if I happen to get a few more blocks done so I can show you some different settings. Otherwise, I think I've showed you enough that you'll get an idea, and then you can play with it to work whatever works for you. Because there is no quilting police. You can lay these blocks whatever and however they work for you. So I hope you enjoyed that. Take care, and thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for watching. I very much appreciate it. If you want to make sure you don't miss a single video I published, hit the subscribe button below and then hit the bell icon. And that way you will be notified whenever I publish a new video. But you can also find me over on Facebook, facebook.com/Wendy, the initial J, Haney. Or I have a Facebook group for those of you that love quilting, needlework, books, wine, and wellness. You can find that at facebook.com/groups/lifefulfilled. The name of the group is Life Fulfilled - Quilting, Needlework, Books, Wine, and Wellness. You can also find me over on my website, wendyjhaney.com. I will be doing more blogging over there eventually. As I get more of my videos done, I'll be blogging about those. But also, maybe you see some things that I'm making here and you're going, ooh, wow, I just don't want to make that myself. Well, a lot of those products will end up over there on the website that you can purchase for your friends and family. Once again, thank you so much for your support, and I appreciate you watching.